Welcome to the peer-reviewed podcast, Creativity and Fulfillment in Academia. I'm Sarah Bunin-Benor. In each episode, my co-host Mira Sukharov and I speak to fellow scholars and other experts about how to live a good academic life. Today, I'll be interviewing Walt Wolfram. Walt is a legend in my field, sociolinguistics. He is the William C. Friday Distinguished University Professor at North Carolina State University, and he also directs the Language and Life Project there. Walt has pioneered research on social and ethnic dialects since the 1960s. He has published 24 books, edited 8 books, and published over 300 articles. Over the last several decades, he and his colleagues and students have conducted more than 4,000 sociolinguistic interviews with residents of North Carolina and beyond, and this is primarily with funding from the National Science Foundation. He has won many awards for his research and his public engagement, and he's been inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and served as president of the Linguistic Society of America, the American Dialect Society, and the Southeastern Conference on Linguistics. Walt Wolfram, welcome to Peer Review.
Well, thanks for having me. Nice to be here.
Well, I have a lot of questions for you. First, I want to start with a brief description of your research. What are the themes and focuses?
Well, I have several different foci. I started doing sort of ethnic varieties because when I came into the field, which wasn't a field when I came into it, there was a lot of discussion about African American language. And it was contentious in a very different way than it is today. You know, today it's contentious in terms of issues related to identity and so forth. At the time I came into it, it was controversial because there were questions about the educational gap between African American and white students. Several of the early works were actually funded by the National Education Society, or the Department of National Education, which is, of course, now under fire. It may be lost because they were concerned if language differences had anything to do with the scholarly gap between white and black. And so several of us took on that. And quite honestly, I was looking for an interesting dissertation topic. And I call myself an accidental academic because I come from a very different kind of background. My parents have 8th grade education. I would have six children in the family. I'm the only one even with a college degree. My wife doesn't have a college degree, you know. So I grew up in a very working class neighborhood where I didn't even know college graduates, and it was a world completely alien to me. I didn't know anybody who went to college, and really went to college in order to play football and basketball. So I came from a different environment, and in that context, I've always felt that research for the sake of research was interesting, and it gave you sort of academic capital, but it really wasn't what I wanted to do to justify my existence. And so I did it because that's what the universities require. But I was really interested, and it turns out that many sociolinguistic topics, and the topics I was looking at, you know, are wide open for engagement and people taking their linguistic information and trying to apply it to the public. And over the years, I realized that it was a legitimate enterprise and not something that I had to sort of justify, even though today in our circles, people who do engagement and quote applied stuff tend to have less prestige, but that didn't bother me, and so in that sense, I always felt that if I had information, then I wanted to put it to good use, and as a human being, that made me feel better then writing another article that a half a dozen people read. And I worked a year on, and a couple of them didn't understand it. A couple of them found it boring, and a couple of my students liked. So in that sense, I got a lot more fulfillment out of going out in public, and so it just became a natural part of who I am. And then when I was younger, I also went and taught at a predominantly African American university because I was challenged by Black scholars to sort of give back my scholarship to the Black community, and so I taught there for over 20 years, and I've had a life in which I love being engaged with communities that are more like the one I grew up in, to tell you the truth. And I often say I feel more comfortable in a community of working class people than I do in a conference of scholars, in terms of sort of who I am, where I come from, and what I want to do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So where did you teach? What was that historically Black college?
Yeah, so that was the University of District of Columbia.
Oh, okay. And
At the time, I was at Georgetown at the Center for Applied Linguistics. I left Georgetown to go to the University of District of Columbia while I worked at the Center for Applied Linguistics. So my teaching was done at the University of District of Columbia. And I also found out, that engagement at its roots is pretty tough sledding, and there are lots of issues with life that relate to teaching in context where people come to you and say, I missed class because my brother was stabbed the other day and I had to go to the hospital with him. So it gives you a light on sort of people's lives and how much and how little language have to do with it. So it was a good activity. Eventually, I got a call, and they called to offer me a distinguished professorship here at North Carolina State University. And I just said, well, we don't know anybody there, but we'll try it and see how it works out. And so that's how I ended up here.
And then a lot of your research ended up being about language in North Carolina. Can you tell us just a little bit about that?
And it's kind of interesting because one of the things that I found out when I came to North Carolina is that North Carolina is a state that really likes itself in the sense that it treasures the poets, it treasures its landscape, which is mountain and ocean. It treasures the writers and the performers and the artists and so forth. So it's really has really deep and proud cultural traditions that it celebrates. But of course, with respect to language, being a southern state, it was really ambivalent. And most people who are Southern, who are educated, have gone through the process of being taught not to sound so Southern. And so I found, this is a state that really ought to celebrate its diverse heritage, because it's got all of these different regional dialects. It has really fun and engaging sort of historical and ethnic varieties. And so I thought there's a good opportunity to do work under the theme that if scholars have information, then they have a responsibility to give it back to the communities that they serve. We can't just go in, take data, and that's sort of the bad reputation that researchers have. Yeah, these guys did research here 10 years ago. I had no idea what they were doing. I never heard from them again, and I happened to pick up an article and it's about us that nobody ever told me about. As a matter of fact, on that score, I want to tell you something about, as everybody in the field knows, Bill LaBeouf did work in Martha's Vineyard, which was landmark work that was the first field work and sort of empirical analysis and very sophisticated, but also at the same very sort of community oriented. Well, I went up there 40 years later, all right, and with a friend, with one of my students, Tyler Kendall, who was born and raised on Martha's Vineyard. Nobody ever heard about that research. There are two things that they know about. There's the indigenous Native American tribe that was there, and they had an early deaf community. So when you say, do you know anything about language here? Nobody knew anything. So I said to Tyler, I said, this isn't right. This was the birthplace of social linguistic research. And so because he was in the community, his father was a doctor in the hospital, he wrote up several articles, and we started working with the Archival Association to get Bill's tapes there, and also to write up about this sort of a pioneering effort that was taking place in Martha's Vineyard. I'm not saying that Bill, of course, was very engaged in lots of issues that related to his dialect differences, but the community where he started his work didn't know about it, and so our task became sort of getting people in the community to learn about this, which we
Yeah.
did pretty successfully.
Oh, that's great. And you've also done that in North Carolina. Can you tell us about some of the films you've made and
Yeah,
the public facing writing that you've done?
yeah, it's sort of interesting because although I had a vision, I really didn't have a plan in terms of, so how are we going to do this, and of course I came here in 1992. That was before the digital age. We didn't have an internet. All filming was done analog, and so it occurred to me that once we had done some of our research and people took interest in some of the communities, because as it turned out, they were unique communities of historical people who were one of the first English-speaking settlements here in the United States. So they took great interest in that. And so we said, well, we can turn this around and use it to promote things related to North Carolina that it's proud of. And so with the island of Ocracoke, which is a small island of like 900 people, about 350 are natives, ancestral islanders that go back to 1710, it was settled. And so we started interviewing people. Then the newspapers became interested in what we were doing. Television became interested in what we were doing. And so we got appearances. Well, we were in lots of different newspapers, including the local ones. And we got a visit from BBC and CBS and Turner News and things like that. And so we got a lot of publicity. And at that point, sort of the media age was taking off, digital media. And I had a young man who had just finished his undergraduate degree. And I said, I wonder if you're interested in anything related to film. Well, I hired him, and that person Neil Hutchison turned out to be very talented, and he's been with him for 25 years. We've done 18 altogether movies for PBS. We've won Emmy Awards, which of course are noteworthy, but even more importantly, we have a YouTube channel of all of those films and other vignettes, over 100 of them, which now has had more than 24 million views. So if you're a teacher and you want to show a film, you can just give them the YouTube station, and then you can discuss it in class, which lots of teachers do now. So actually, that turned out to be sort of insightful and a little entrepreneurial, and right now we have 2 full-time videographers who work with us. That's all they do. It's films.
Oh, wow. Where did you get the funding for all this work?
Well, NSF has funded me, and also I've gotten funded from local foundations. I got some rich people to donate money, and I also have an endowment in which I have discretionary funds. But I want to tell you about the first one because in a sense, while you need money to do this, you can also start it without money. So in my first class here, I was teaching a course in modern English, and a couple of students said to me, she said, we're really interested in all this stuff, but we don't want to be linguists. I said, well, what do you want to be? She said, well, we want to be filmmakers. I said, I'll tell you what, I'll set up an independent study for you. We'll borrow film equipment from the communication department because every university has communications where they do film production or critical film theory. And I'll set up an independent study for you. You can go to Ocracoke and do a film. So the next semester I set that up. They used the lab. This was still in the days of analog. They used the lab at night when the students weren't using it. And they produced a film called the Ocracoke Brogue, a 15-minute film, which was a little rough because they had never done a documentary, but it captured the island. And in 1995, we showed that film in the Preservation Society. They have a building where people visit and can see. They decided to set up a room with that film and call it the dialect room. And that film still shows today on a loop all day long after 25 years, because the islanders don't want it to go away. They don't want to modernize it. They want people to see the island as it was.
Oh, so that is just amazing. Wow.
And that cost me less than $1,000.
Yeah.
And the students got an A.
I'm sure they did. Wow. So that is a great way to combine your research, your teaching, and your public engagement all in one.
Exactly. We had done research there. We had written research articles, and people were interested. The public was interested in it. The people became proud of it. And then the other thing we did there was we said, if you want, we'll come back and teach a curriculum on your dialect and the dialects of North Carolina. So the first one we taught was in 1993. Every year since then, every spring break, I take my first year students and we teach 8th graders about their dialect and dialects of North Carolina. So we've done that for 33 years now. And we've also developed a curriculum for the entire social studies unit that is the only one that is endorsed by a state, and anyone can teach that during social studies. Anyone in the state can teach that. We've done a sort of planning and presentation, on websites and so forth, where we teach teachers how to teach it and so forth. So that's the only sort of ongoing curriculum program that's about dialects and the dialects of a community that's been in existence over 32 some years.
So North Carolina is probably the most linguistically self-aware state because of all of your work.
It is. Ocracoke probably has the highest per capita knowledge of what an isogloss is in the world. For whatever that means. As a matter of fact, we have people in their 50s who I taught, and I have a deal that if I'm on the island and you come up and tell me what an isogloss is, I'll give you $1.
Okay, now you have to tell our listeners who are not in linguistics what an isogloss is.
An isogloss is an abstract line that says, here's where one dialect ends and another begins. A lot of these dialect boundaries are not sort of like lines in the sand where people step over them and they're in the dialect area, but they're transitional. But it is sort of an abstract line where one dialect begins and another ends.
Okay, so in this podcast, we talk about the different parts of an academic's career: research, teaching, service, and then we add public engagement, because a lot of people do that and it isn't always understood as one of the 4 parts of our job, but we're talking about it like that. So of those parts of your job, which do you find the most fulfilling?
Oh, without a doubt, public engagement. I love doing that. As a matter of fact, 84 years old. If I were simply an academic instructor, I would have retired at 65 or 66. But I enjoy this so much, and I love sort of people wide-eyed. Like the other day, I gave a talk to a senior citizen center, which I do a lot, where I'm now older than some of the people. But because we have all these films, we have all this footage. And so we also did a couple of books. One of earlier books we did 10 years ago is called Talking Tar Heel. And it's about the different dialects and the composition of the state. And we have, we have a chapter on Hispanicized English, on Lumbee, which is a Native American variety, and African American English in the Outer Banks and Appalachia and so forth. But what's really cool about it is we have QRs in it. So we have over 130 QRs. So I give a description of something like bless your heart, and I give an academic description, but then I show two people at the state fair discussing that term. And all of a sudden people can see, oh, this is what we're talking about. This is really cool, because the people say, oh yeah, you can really compliment an old person, compliment a kid, but it's also very insulting, if you say, you ask, well, how is that kid as a student? Bless his heart. That's an insult. So all of these come true. So many of them are funny. Some of them are cute. We talk about misunderstandings and so forth, and we can illustrate these. And so it's the first linguistic book for the public that actually uses QRs. And so that's become a lot of fun too.
Yeah, and it really is helpful to have these new technologies that facilitate that. I mean, even back when in the early 90s, when you were doing these films, it was the technology of film that allowed you to capture
Yeah,
that.
yeah. And then of course, when film went digital, that became a big phase too. And now with social media, we have a TikTok, we have an Instagram, we have a Facebook, and we often show little bits and pieces and discuss them on our social media, because nowadays that's where lots of young people get their information. People aren't sitting, they're not sitting in an easy chair reading a newspaper.
Yeah. So you mentioned an early collaboration with a filmmaker and another collaboration with someone on Martha's Vineyard. Can you tell us about your experiences with your many academic and public engagement collaborations?
At first, it was difficult because no one knew who we are. Now, everywhere we go, people know who we are and what we've done. So one of the things that we do is North Carolina is one of those states that has a big state fair. All right, 1 million people come to Raleigh, and it's a 10-day affair over 2 weekends. It runs from 9 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night. So for the last 15 years, we have a booth. We have posters. We have gimmicks, including sort of technology, so you can push on something, hear a person talk, guess where they're from, and then hear where they're from. But we also have a little roulette wheel, because a lot of older people who come, they see a screen, an interactive screen, and then they can just spin the wheel and go to a dialect item and then try to define it, what it is, and so forth. So, and then we give out buttons. So we give out dialect buttons, over 7,000 buttons a year we give out. And the idea is to sort of help people learn to celebrate. So my students, as part of their course, are required to spend 4 hours there interacting with the public. That's the only way we can service it. I can't sit there. I can't sit there for 11 hours a day by myself for 10 days, So, and as it turns out, they love it. They love doing it. And it teaches them sort of how people are sharp and curious about dialects. And some of them think that, because at the state fair, you get a lot of farmers and country folk and so forth. And so university students tend to be more liberal. They get afraid because this is sort of a conservative place. But, we've never had any political dissent at all, because people aren't aware of sort of the underlying ideologies. They just think dialects are sort of cute things or problems that they had to overcome or something like that. And I tell the students, because they get scared. They say, there's a right wing organization right around the corner from us. I said, don't worry about it. People don't ask you about politics. And so we also advertise it to them as this is one thing that's not political that people can get along with. And pretty much I find that's the case. I mean, I don't get into arguments in old people's homes or in senior citizens centers about politics. And I said we can all unite and celebrate this aspect of North Carolina culture. And then, of course, we sell videos there, we sell books, and we give out free buttons and material.
Oh, that's great. Now you've just given me several ideas for additional public engagement things I can do through the Jewish Language Project. So I may be contacting you about how to do that roulette wheel and the those activities in the booth. That's great.
Yeah, we bought a roulette wheel online for $10, right? And then we put pictures of items, like, for example, a building that's standing crooked, and say, okay, give me the terms for this. And they have to say cattywampus, or in the western part of the state in the mountains, they say Saigoglin. And actually, every year we have 2 new buttons. And last year we said, we need something a little more for the young people. So we introduced sleigh and bussin'. And all the young people know it, the old people don't.
What is that?
Sleigh, that's from Black culture. It's something that's good.
And sleigh, and what was the other? Oh, bussin', sleigh,
bussin', and yeah, bussin'. Something is delicious. Oh man, that food is bussin'.
I love that. So you're getting people of all ages engaged.
Well, we're getting people of all ages, and of course the parents don't know, but we get kids in 3rd and 4th grade who know what those terms are.
Yeah.
And so they're educating the parents. So it's not simply a matter of the old people remember some of the young people have some terms too.
Right. Okay, so let's talk about how you organize your work day, and your work week and work year. How do you organize it all?
How do I organize it? Well, first of all, I'm pretty much open to invitations to speak. Before COVID and after COVID, I was doing 60 to 80 talks, because I talked at civic organizations early in the morning. I talked at senior centers in the evening, and I also talk in libraries. So we also have a unit that we do in a high school every year for Black History Month. So a couple of my Black colleagues, students, and I go into a school for Black History Month. Kids can be invited to attend, but they're not forced to attend. We'll get 250 kids in a high school auditorium, show them clips from Talking Black in America, and have a great conversation. Then in the evening, they set up a what is it, a parent teachers association, and then we meet with the parents and teachers and show them part of a film and have a discussion for Black History Month. So we've done that 3 years in a row now at the local high school where my grandkids went to school, and it's worked amazingly well. But then I'll take a week or so when I'm not having that sort of that sort of commitment, and do research. We've been researching a suburban community here that used to be a farming community, and it's transitioning. So we're in Raleigh, which is very urban. My colleague Robin Dodsworth is studying Raleigh. She has over 350 interviews that she's done. And so we decided we'd study a new suburb that used to be very rural and is now turning urban. And so we've done over 100 interviews with older, middle-aged, and younger people. And so as a part of that, I offered them, I said, well, what can we do for you in exchange for this study? And so we did a very nice oral history. We're finishing off a film, and we do regular presentations at the Historical Society for that organization. We always ask them what they would like us to do.
Wow. So it sounds like you're pretty busy with all of the public engagement and the continuing research. What do you do to minimize stress?
Well, I have grandkids. I have 6 grandkids who live within walking distance of our house.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
All of them are very athletic and very active in school. So I go to their theater productions, I go to their athletic events. And the nice thing about grandkids is when I'm focused on them, I'm not thinking about school. I'm just enjoying them. So I also work out because I'm kind of a type A. And so I go and lift weights and work out a couple mornings a week. And other than that, I'm thinking about my work a lot more than I probably should. But it's Monday morning. I don't feel like, oh, I have to go back to work. I'm excited to go back to work because I get to teach the students. I get to work with them. Actually, I've looked in the literature a little. PhD students who are working on engagement projects tend to be a lot happier and feel a lot more fulfilled than those who just focus on their dissertation.
That's not
And
surprising. Yeah.
yeah, and so a lot of our students are engaged in that. So for example, at the beginning of the year, we have a 1-day big fair called a Packapalooza. All right. And we have a booth. And so for 8 hours, we're out on the street with the parades and so forth, giving out information to new students. And we also have a linguistic ambassadors project where in freshman writing, anyone who would like a lecture on dialect diversity in their freshman one writing class can notify us, and we'll get a couple of students who give a presentation for a period. And we get like 20 to 30 of those a year because, who doesn't want to lecture off?
Wow. So you're really spreading your gospel of public engagement to your students, and probably they'll spread it to their students wherever they end up teaching.
Yeah, the big issue now is I'm going to retire soon. This isn't something that I did just while I'm here. This is something to be sustained. So in that respect, I have a couple of sons who are venture capitalists. And while, a lot of things that venture capitalists do, people don't like, they do tend to make a lot of money. And so my sons have given a couple $1 million to endow a chair that would ensure that engagement will go on.
Oh, wow. So it's built into the job description?
Yeah, when I go, there's an endowed professorship because my professorship is not in linguistics. It's just a university-wide professorship, and they will take it away. But what I could do when I have sort of money, because every year I have like $50,000 to $100,000 that I can spend on doing projects that I want to do. So, for example, that pays for taking the kids to teach in the school, which is about a $5,000 venture because we have to feed them and they have to have beds to sleep in and so forth. So the idea is to maintain this, and also I have one person that I pay from endowment funds and grants. So half comes from the college and half comes to the department. And I went to the officers and said, look, this is so important and it gets such good visibility and it's so good for the university. I've been supporting it out of my funds. It's time for you to pick up the tab. And they did it. Well, the problem is they did it because they like me and I do good things for them too, because I talk to alumni groups. I talk to the board of trustees. I give them our popular books when they come out and so forth. And so I don't want this to be a personal thing. I want this to be an activist cause that is sustained. It's not the Walt Wolfram project. It's the North Carolina Language and Life Project. We can now have a search for someone who has both strong research and engagement skills to do it. There are a couple of people out there.
Yeah. So your legacy will live on at North Carolina State, and in the many other institutions that your students will populate.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, what I find is, what often happens, say, for example, literature. Okay, so you teach 18th century literature. I'm in an English department. After about 20 years of teaching that, some people want to do something a little different. So they start writing memoirs or fiction. I can't tell you how many of our English professors have done. I mean, and there's a sense in which linguistics research is great and it's fun, but sort of after a while, you sort of want to do something for society. Society has so many issues and language is so misunderstood that I feel a lot better talking to a group of seniors who come away saying, that was really interesting. I never knew of this sort of great heritage that we have. So I feel really inspired by the people that I lecture to, and they sort of keep me going, but I don't want it to stop with me. I want it to keep going. I didn't do this for me. I did it for the cause.
And so it's not surprising that the state of North Carolina recognized your work. You got the North Carolina Award, the highest award given to a citizen of North Carolina, and all sorts of other awards from the state. And so it's great that they're recognizing your work. But Walt Wolfram, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us today and for inspiring our listeners with the wonderful work you've done.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to me, and one of the reasons I do it is because it makes me feel good. It makes me feel useful, and it keeps me youthful. So there are a lot of good things. People worry as they grow older, and what am I going to do to sort of maintain my cognitive framework and to sort of feel healthy and to feel good about myself. And when I come back from one of these activities, I feel so enthralled and engaged and happy. So it makes me happy.
And I think just listening to this interview will make our listeners happy. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
The Peer Review podcast is produced and hosted by Sarah Bunin-Benor and Mira Sukharov. Talia Ehrenberg is assistant producer and editor. The music is written and performed by the Galactic Ambassadors. Support for this podcast comes from a faculty grant from Hebrew Union College. If you would like to sponsor an episode, you can reach us at peerreview@huc.edu. You can join the conversation on Facebook at Peer Review, Cultivating Creativity and Fulfillment in Academia. Thank you for listening.